Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm doing another video about some books that I am excited to read eventually, some books that I want to read. I already have a couple videos talking about larger series that I want to read. When I started my channel, I did one for top 5 series that I wanted to read, and I recently did a 10 series that I want to read now. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about some trilogies that I want to read. And you may be wondering, why did I decide to split this up into 2 videos, considering I could have included trilogies in my series video or something like that. As I was putting together my list, which ended up being around 25, I realized I had enough larger series, and enough trilogies for their own dedicated videos. So that's why I'm doing it this way. So to start things off, at my number 10, the first trilogy that I want to read eventually is the Rhapsody Trilogy by Elizabeth Hayden, I believe is the name of the author. This is one that I haven't heard talked about very much, but a good friend of mine and fellow booktuber Jonathan Cohn really enjoyed this trilogy. And so I'm really interested in reading it. A lot of the stuff that he talked about with it sounded really interesting. So it seems like a trilogy. I don't know if it would be necessarily up my alley, but it seems like something that I'm interested in at least checking out. And it's a series that I also just haven't heard talked about very much. So, you know, that also kind of draws my attention to it a little bit, because I enjoy kind of checking out some lesser known stuff as well. Which I haven't done a whole lot of up until this point, but I would like to check out some more, you know, less popular, lesser well-known books. So that is my number 10. The next one up is going to be the Broken Empire Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. This is one that seems to have been very, very popular over the last several years, but I have never read it. This is one that I have not heard a ton about, despite it being quite popular. I haven't really looked into it a whole lot, but because it's very popular, that kind of piques my interest. I've heard some kind of mixed things about it from what I have heard. You know, it is fairly popular, so there is that, but I've heard a fair share of criticism for it. But it's one that I'm interested in reading because I want to kind of get more into some of the big popular series that are going on nowadays. This one just seems kind of cool. So that is my number 9. My number 8 is going to be a Brandon Sanderson trilogy, which surprisingly is not higher on the list, but this one isn't quite as exciting to me, but I still want to read it, and that's the Reckoners trilogy. I know a few people who have read these books, and they have all said that they are wonderful. Kind of similar to in my series video that I did where I talked about Skyward. This is one where I haven't read much of Brandon Sanderson outside. I haven't read any Brandon Sanderson outside the Cosmere, actually. And not really anything that isn't fantasy either, because, you know, the Cosmere is fantasy. And so it would be interesting to see something different out of that. I've heard that the Reckoners is kind of superhero-ish, a little bit, and so that seems really cool to me. I think that sounds really interesting. I'm excited to see how he kind of plays with that. And so, you know, it's written by Brandon Sanderson. It has a unique concept for his work, and that's why I'm excited to read it. My number 7 is a classic sci-fi trilogy, and that is the Foundation Trilogy by Isaac Asimov. I haven't read very much sci-fi in general, and especially not classic sci-fi. Actually, I think I've read more classic sci-fi than modern sci-fi, unless you're counting Star Wars books in there. If you remove those, I've read, oh my goodness, I can't talk today, apparently. I've read way more classic fantasy because I've read War of the Worlds and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and things like that. But I haven't still read very much classic sci-fi or sci-fi in general. And considering how important and foundational, no pun intended, Isaac Asimov was for the sci-fi genre, I really want to read some of his stuff. I don't really know much about his work, but because of its importance and the legacy of it, I do really want to read it. My number 6 is a self-published trilogy. Actually, I believe it's self-published anyway, and that's the Gunmetal Gods trilogy by Zamil Akhtar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a trilogy that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but Daniel Green, one of the very popular booktubers here on YouTube, has talked about this trilogy quite a bit and seems to have loved it a whole lot. Or at least the first 2 books. I can't remember if the 3rd book is out yet, but if it's not, then it's going to be soon, I think. And this trilogy seems really cool. It has a really interesting premise. I've heard that, I don't know about the first 2 books, but I've heard the 3rd book kind of goes a little bit kind of eldritch horror, cosmic horror type thing, which seem, me being a big Lovecraft fan really makes me interested in that. And I want to check out some more self-published and indie published stuff because I haven't really done that. And so this is one that I do want to check out. My number 5 is another sci-fi series, this time a more modern one, and one that I have heard so many incredible things about. And there is a second trilogy as well. It is a larger series, but the first trilogy is what I'm focusing on here, and that's the Red Rising Trilogy by Pierce Brown. Again, I have heard so many incredible things about this series. It seems like every big booktuber has read this series and loved it. And so I'm really excited to read it eventually. And again, haven't read much sci-fi, haven't read much modern sci-fi, and this one seems to be very well liked by a lot of the people who have read it, a lot of the people that I've seen who have reviewed it and all that stuff. And so I'm very excited to read it eventually. Again, don't know a whole lot about it. I've seen some videos on it and things like that, but I don't really know a ton about this series or this trilogy. And but it does seem really interesting, and given its popularity, I figure it's popular for a reason, so I do really want to check it out. My number 4 is another indie self-published trilogy, quite a few of these on this list, and that is the Threadlight Trilogy by Zach Argyle. This is one that I don't think I've really heard much talked about, but I do have some friends who have read it, who have really enjoyed it. I've heard it compared to The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which immediately makes me very interested in this because I love the Stormlight Archive that I've read so far. I've only read the first 2 books, but I love the Stormlight Archive so far. And so saying this reminds me of Stormlight Archive immediately makes me really want to read it. I know nothing about this trilogy aside from that, but the people that I have spoken to who have read the series have really, really loved it. And given, that comparison, I'm really excited to read it sometime. My number 3 is going to be the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. It is part of a larger series as well, but the First Law Trilogy is, what I'm focusing on here. This is, I've often heard this alongside the likes of A Song of Ice and Fire, kind of referred to as the grimdark series for fantasy. I'm not really super into grimdark. All I've really read of grimdark is, A Song of Ice and Fire. There may be some other stuff here and there that I've read that you might consider grimdark, but I've not read much of it. But I've heard that this is a great series for that, and also just a great trilogy in its own right. I've heard that Joe Abercrombie is a fantastic writer. I've especially heard great things about his action scenes and his characters, which makes me very excited because those are some of my favorite parts of the books that I've read in general. And so I'm really excited to read the First Law sometime. I've heard so much praise for it. Seems cool. I've heard a lot about it. And so I'm very interested in reading it. My number 2 is, I can't remember if this is a indie or self-published. I think it is, but I can't actually remember. But it's one that I've not heard a lot about. And that is the Tide Child Trilogy by R.J. Barker. This is one, I believe, Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, who's, again, a great channel that you should go check out. He's one of my favorites. He loves this trilogy, and basically his recommendation alone makes me really want to read this book, or this trilogy, rather, because he has really talked it up. He makes it sound absolutely fantastic. It sounds very unique. It has a very unique sort of premise to it. It's a nautical fantasy, it sounds like, which I've not read much of. I've read a couple of more nautical fantasies, and they were kind of cool, but I want to read some more of them, and so this will definitely scratch that itch for me. And it's, again, kind of a lesser popular series that I've not read, and so that kind of makes me more interested in reading it, because I want to see what's up with some of the less popular, less well-known ones. And, I'm not a very big channel, but if I can give them any sort of boost, then that would be super cool. So I really want to check this trilogy out. I've actually seen it at my local bookstores, but I haven't actually been able to pick it up, sadly. But I do hope to get it eventually, because it seems very, very interesting. And my number 1 is kind of out of left field for this list, because it's not a sci-fi or fantasy trilogy. I mean, it's, from what I've heard, got a little bit of fantasy elements to it, but it's actually a horror trilogy, and that is the John Cleaver trilogy by Dan Wells. Those of you who are fans of Brandon Sanderson may know Dan Wells is one of the people at Dragonsteel. He's a longtime friend of Brandon's, and he runs the Intentionally Blank podcast, with Brandon, which I love that podcast, and that's basically the one reason why I want to read these books. I've also heard some good things about this trilogy from some people, but Dan Wells just seems like a wonderful person. And because of that, and because of his podcast that he does, and because he is now going to be writing for the Cosmere, which is super cool, I really want to check out some of his own work. And his most popular work is the John Cleaver trilogy. And so this is one that is a bit different from the normal sort of stuff that I read, but because of Dan Wells and him being who he is, and being involved with what he's involved with, I really want to check it out. I want to read some of his writing because I've heard some incredible things about it. Yeah, I'm really excited to read it. But that is pretty much it for this video. So let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these trilogies and what you thought of them, or if you're interested in reading any of them. And if you have any other trilogies that you would like to check out, then leave those in the comments below. I'm always looking for some more recommendations. So if you have any that you are on your radar, then let me know. And that is pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.